She's not even military. Arrest her!" The Veterans Center shook as military police burst through the door, rifles up, boots crashing, voices screaming. In the middle of it all, Riley Vega stood calm until one word shattered her silence. "SEAL Team 6. The room froze. A butterfly tattoo shimmered beneath her sleeve, and beneath that was a number the government buried. They thought she was dead. They were wrong. They thought she'd stay silent. They were wrong again. She wasn't just trained to survive, she was trained to disappear. You're watching Veteran Biker. Tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. The Riverside Community Center, a place where the morning sun usually dappled through wide windows, illuminating mismatched chairs arranged in a familiar circle. It was a Tuesday, a day like any other, meant for shared stories, quiet camaraderie, and the comforting clink of coffee mugs. For Riley Vega, a mechanic with hands perpetually stained by grease, it was a sanctuary. For 8 months she'd found solace here, always claiming the same quiet spot by the window, always arriving precisely 5 minutes early, a silent sentinel among those bearing invisible wounds. She spoke rarely, but when her voice did cut through the hushed room, it carried a weight that made others lean forward, anticipating wisdom. But this Tuesday was different. This morning the sanctuary shattered. The door exploded inward with a deafening bang, splintering wood and echoing through the space. "Nobody move!" A serene morning at the Riverside Community Center, typically filled with the comforting hum of shared stories and the gentle clinking of coffee mugs, was abruptly shattered. Without warning, military police, heavily armed and with grim, unyielding expressions, stormed into the room. Their drawn weapons and formidable presence created a stark, terrifying contrast to the soft, unsuspecting light filtering through the windows. Instantaneous chaos erupted. Riley Vega's coffee mug, still radiating warmth from her grasp, slipped and shattered on the floor, a sudden brittle sound that echoed the immediate horrifying shift in atmosphere. Before she could even process the violent intrusion, rough, unyielding hands seized her arms, yanking them painfully behind her back with a harsh finality. "Riley Vega, you're under arrest for stolen valor and fraud," a voice barked, cutting through the stunned silence. The other veterans present, frozen in a collective state of shock and disbelief, watched in helpless silence as Riley was forcibly dragged away in handcuffs. The easy camaraderie, the fundamental trust that formed the very fabric of their morning ritual, was brutally torn apart in that single shattering instant. An oppressive tension lingered in the room, a heavy blanket of disbelief settling over the circle of mismatched chairs. Travis Heller, a former army sergeant known for his expansive waistline and a perpetually disgruntled demeanor, typically dominated these meetings with his boisterous narratives. On this particular morning, he'd been holding court, his stories of Afghanistan deployments growing increasingly embellished, each one more grandiose and demonstrably improbable than the last. Riley, as was her custom, had listened with quiet patience, though a subtle tightening in her jaw betrayed her growing unease with each exaggeration. She had witnessed enough genuine combat to instinctively recognize the hollow, tinny ring of a fabricated tale. "And then I single-handedly took out that Taliban stronghold. Just me, a rifle, and pure grit," Travis bellowed, his voice accustomed to holding an audience. His booming pronouncement was abruptly cut short by Riley's quiet, almost whispered interjection, delivered with an unexpected, cutting precision. "That's not how it works," she stated, her voice calm but with an undeniable edge of authority. "You don't just storm a compound alone. There are protocols, backup, extraction plans. Real combat isn't a video game." Her words, simple and factual, pierced through Travis's bluster like a sharp blade. Travis Heller's face, already flushed from his self-inflated narrative, deepened to an angry, mottled red. His fragile ego, clearly bruised by Riley's simple, irrefutable truth, lashed out with condescending venom. "Oh, and what would you know about it, sweetheart? You fix cars for a living." His tone dripped with dismissive scorn, attempting to reduce her experiences to her civilian occupation. The room went dead silent. Everyone present was well aware that Riley worked at Jimmy's auto shop downtown. Her hands were perpetually stained with grease and oil, her practical uniform coveralls seemingly concealing little beyond the ordinary. To Travis, and likely to many others who judged purely by superficial appearances, she was utterly unremarkable. Small-framed, habitually quiet, with shoulder-length brown hair, always neatly tied back in a practical ponytail, she fit neatly into the predefined box they'd collectively created for her. A humble, unassuming mechanic, nothing more, nothing less. "I know because I was there," Riley stated, her voice holding steady despite a faint, almost imperceptible tremor that had begun in her hands. Syria, 2019. Our unit was tasked with infiltrating a high-value target compound outside Raqqa. Intelligence suggested they were holding American hostages. A ripple of confused glances spread through the group of veterans. Riley had almost never shared explicit details about her service before, offering only vague, dismissive references to overseas deployment whenever pressed for information. Now, however, she spoke with the clinical, almost dispassionate precision of someone recounting a formal mission briefing, her voice devoid of overt emotion, like a seasoned operator relaying critical facts. "We went in at 0300 hours, a four-person team. The intel was wrong. It was a trap. They were waiting for us." The chilling realization of that moment, years prior, hung heavy in her words. Her voice grew distant, her eyes focusing on something far beyond the community center's water-stained ceiling. "The first IED took out our communications. The second one—" She touched her collarbone unconsciously, where 3 parallel scars disappeared beneath her flannel shirt. They were faint, barely noticeable, but to Riley they were screaming. Travis Heller scoffed again, his cynicism boiling over. "Right, and I suppose you were Special Forces. Navy SEAL, maybe? Come on, lady. Women can't even pass SEAL training, let alone serve in combat units." But Riley didn't flinch. Her gaze met his directly, unwavering. "Actually, I was a SEAL. Team 6, Specialized Maritime Operations. My call sign was Phantom." The room erupted. Half the veterans laughed outright, their disbelief echoing. Others shifted uncomfortably, sensing a line had been crossed, or perhaps a truth too strange to comprehend. Travis Heller, however, saw his moment. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying across the screen with furious intent. "This is it. I'm calling this in. Stolen valor is a federal crime. I'm not sitting here listening to some wannabe mechanic disrespect real warriors." Riley remained perfectly calm, even as Travis ranted into his phone about fraudulent claims and disrespectful civilians. Her breathing was controlled, her posture still, almost serene. Other veterans tried to defuse the situation, murmuring apologies, attempting to reason with Travis, but he was beyond it. His self-righteous anger had taken over. "You want to know what real combat looks like? It's not heroic, it's not glorious. It's watching your teammate bleed out in your arms while you're zip-tied to a chair, listening to them scream your real name over and over until they finally break and tell the enemy everything they want to know." The room went dead silent. Even Travis Heller, mid-rant, stopped his pacing, his phone still clutched to his ear, listening. Riley's voice, though quiet, resonated with a chilling, undeniable authenticity. "It's spending 4 months in a cell that's too small to stand up in. Eating rice and cockroaches while they try to break you with everything from waterboarding to electric shocks. It's escaping by killing 3 guards with a piece of broken concrete, and then walking 47 miles through hostile territory with a dislocated shoulder and internal bleeding. Her voice never wavered, never changed inflection as she recited the harrowing details. It was as if she were reading from a grocery list, mundane facts of a horrifying reality, but her hands, clasped tightly together, were shaking so violently they trembled visibly. It's coming home to a country that erased every record of your service, gave you a new identity, and told you to forget everything that happened because it was too classified for the history books. It's working as a mechanic because that's the only job they could arrange that wouldn't require a background check that might expose operations that officially never happened. That was the moment the door exploded open for the second time, only this time the military police were there for her. Now, as the police car pulled away from the community center, Riley caught her reflection in the window. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to be, a 34-year-old mechanic who lived quietly in a studio apartment above the Chinese restaurant on 5th Street. Someone unremarkable, someone forgettable, someone who definitely wasn't a decorated SEAL, with more confirmed kills than most people had birthdays. But the 3 parallel scars across her collarbone told a different story, and somewhere, in a classified file that officially didn't exist, Admiral Ward was about to get a phone call that would change everything. Because the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface, and Riley Vega was living proof of that. Detective Julian Cross slammed the case file shut, the sound echoing through the empty bullpen at 2:47 a.m., 3 days of interrogation, and Riley Vega hadn't cracked once. Every other stolen valor case he'd handled fell apart within hours. The frauds always slipped up on basic military knowledge, got their ranks wrong, or couldn't explain why they had no documentation. But Riley was different. Riley was a goddamn enigma wrapped in coveralls and motor oil. Cross rubbed his eyes and opened the file again, spreading the contents across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. On one side, a woman who didn't exist in any military database, had no service records, no discharge papers, no veterans benefits, nothing. On the other side, someone who knew things that made his 20-year law enforcement career feel like amateur hour. The first red flag had come during hour 2 of the initial interrogation. Cross had tried the standard trick, throwing out fake military terminology to see if she'd bite. So, tell me about your experience with tactical soup sandwiches in the field. Riley had looked at him like he'd grown a second head. Detective, there's no such thing as a tactical soup sandwich. That's not military jargon. That's something you picked up from a bad movie. A soup sandwich is slang for something that's completely messed up, but you don't put tactical in front of it. Are you actually trying to test me, or do you just not know what you're talking about? Strike one for the detective. The situation escalated significantly by the 4th hour. Detective Julian Cross, increasingly frustrated by Riley's unwavering composure, decided to escalate his approach. He brought in Sergeant Major Dana Lee from the local recruiting station, a seasoned military professional whose extensive combat experience was meant to quickly expose any fraudulent claims. Lee, with her sharp analytical mind and deep understanding of military life, spent a grueling 30 minutes grilling Riley. Her questions were relentless, spanning the entire spectrum of military knowledge, from the seemingly mundane details of basic training protocols to the intricate complexities of advanced combat techniques. Lee expected to find a slip, a hesitation, a clear sign of deception, yet Riley met every single question with a casual precision that was unsettlingly perfect. Her answers flowed effortlessly, imbued with the unmistakable ring of lived experience, of knowledge earned through visceral reality rather than theoretical study. Describe the sound of incoming mortar fire, Lee demanded, her voice sharp, designed to elicit an immediate instinctive reaction. Riley didn't even hesitate. Her response was immediate, detailed, and chillingly accurate. "Depends on the distance and trajectory," she replied, her voice level. "Close impact sounds like a freight train mixed with thunder, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that vibrates through your bones. Distant ones whistle first, a high-pitched, almost musical whine that cuts through the air before the boom. But the really dangerous ones, the ones that are going to land right on top of you, the ones you can't outrun, they don't whistle at all, they just arrive." Lee's seasoned face, accustomed to the grim realities of war, went pale. The detailed, visceral description, delivered with such detached accuracy, was something only someone who had truly experienced it could articulate. She pulled Cross aside afterward, her voice barely a whisper, laced with a tremor of profound unease. "Julian, I've been in the army for 18 years, Lee confided, her eyes wide with a dawning, disturbing realization. "I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan. That woman just described incoming fire better than most of my combat veterans, better than men who faced it firsthand. There's something deeply, fundamentally wrong here. Either she's the most dedicated, brilliant fraud I've ever met in my entire career, so utterly convincing it's terrifying, or," Cross pressed, his own apprehension growing, "or what, Dana? Or she's telling the truth. And if that's the case, then there's something very, very wrong with this entire picture, something beyond our comprehension." By day 2, Cross's initial skepticism had eroded, replaced by a creeping sense of unease that began to cost him sleep. Riley's knowledge wasn't just accurate in a general sense, it was specific in ways that strongly suggested classified information. She spoke with an alarming familiarity of weapon systems that weren't supposed to exist outside of top-secret programs, described tactics that couldn't be found in any public military manual, and referenced operations that had no official public record whatsoever. Each detail she casually dropped was a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit into any known framework. "Tell me about your training," Cross pressed during one particularly intense session, hoping to find a seam in her narrative, a point where she might falter or contradict herself. Riley paused, her gaze holding his. "Which part?" she countered, the question itself a testament to the sheer breadth of her supposed experience. "Are we talking about basic underwater demolition, the intense physical and mental crucible that pushes trainees to their absolute limits? Or advanced marksmanship, the precision required to put a bullet exactly where it needs to go under pressure? Perhaps survival, evasion, resistance and escape Syria, the brutal program designed to prepare operatives for capture and interrogation?" Or, her voice dropped, a subtle shift in tone, "are you asking about the specialized programs that don't have names?" The last phrase hung in the air, cold and heavy. Cross's mind raced. "The specialized programs," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, drawn in by the veiled mystery. Riley held his gaze for a long, unsettling moment, her expression unreadable. "Detective," she said, her voice now flat, devoid of emotion, "if I told you about those programs, the true nature of what they entailed, you'd either think I was completely insane, delusional beyond help, or you'd have to kill me to protect national security. Neither option, you must admit, seems particularly appealing to me right now." Her words were a chilling confirmation that the rabbit hole went far, far deeper than he could possibly imagine. The breakthrough, if you could call it that, had come when Cross brought in Dr. Tessa Monroe, a psychiatrist who specialized in PTSD cases. Monroe was supposed to evaluate Riley's mental state, determine if she was delusional or simply lying. Instead, she'd emerged from the session looking like she'd seen a ghost. "Julian, we need to talk privately." In the hallway, Monroe had grabbed his arm with trembling fingers. That woman has been through trauma that would break most people. The way she describes her captivity, the specific details about torture techniques, the psychological markers. This isn't something you can fake or research. This is lived experience. But there's no record of her service. Then maybe the records are wrong, or maybe they don't exist for a reason. That night, Cross had done something he'd never done before in 20 years of police work. He'd started making unofficial calls to contacts in federal agencies, asking vague questions about classified military units and black operations. Most had hung up on him. A few had told him to drop it and forget he'd ever asked. One, a former FBI agent named Marcus Thorne, now worked for some unnamed government agency, had listened to his questions in complete silence before saying, "Detective Cross, you're about to step into waters that are way over your head." My advice: process the paperwork, file the case, and forget this woman exists. But Cross couldn't forget. Because on day 3, Riley had done something that changed everything. He'd been pressing her about her supposed escape from captivity, demanding details that could be verified. Riley had been patient, almost gentle in her responses, like she was talking to a child who couldn't understand basic concepts. "You want proof, detective? Something concrete?" She'd rolled up her left sleeve, revealing a forearm covered in what looked like random scars. "These aren't random. They're a map." Cross had leaned forward despite himself. Latitude and longitude coordinates carved into my arm with a piece of broken glass during my 3rd month in captivity. The location of the compound where they held me. The coordinates of the mass grave where they buried the other prisoners. The GPS location of the weapons cache they were planning to use for their next attack. She'd traced the scars with her finger, and Cross realized they weren't random at all. They were numbers carved deep enough to be permanent, precise enough to be functional. I memorized everything, detective. Every face, every voice, every detail of that compound, because I knew that someday someone would need that information. The question is, are you brave enough to verify it? Cross had stared at those scars for a full minute, his mind racing. If Riley was lying, she was the most dedicated fraud in history. If she was telling the truth, then someone very powerful had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her existence, and that someone was about to discover that their carefully constructed lie was unraveling in a small-town police station. One question at a time. Cross reached for his phone. It was time to make a call that would either end his career or change everything he thought he knew about the war on terror. The number he dialed belonged to Admiral Ward, and it was about to ring in a secure facility that officially didn't exist. Admiral Ward hadn't set foot in a civilian police station in 15 years. This was an environment of petty theft reports, domestic disputes, and traffic violations, a stark contrast to the high-stakes world of global intelligence and classified operations she navigated daily. But the encrypted call from NCIS had shattered her Tuesday morning like a sledgehammer through glass, pulling her violently from the quiet contemplation of geopolitical chess moves back into a deeply buried past. She'd been reviewing highly sensitive budget reports in her Pentagon office, the kind of documents that could shift the balance of power on a world stage when Agent Martinez, no relation, just a cosmic, cruel irony, had delivered the news that made her blood turn to ice water, chilling her to the bone. "Ma'am, we have a situation. A woman named Riley Vega has been arrested for stolen valor. She's claiming to be former Navy SEAL Team 6. The local detective is asking questions about classified operations." The words struck Ward with the force of a physical blow. Her coffee mug, still warm with the dark brew she had been nursing, slipped from her trembling fingers. The black liquid spread across the already classified documents like spilled blood, a chilling omen on the pristine white paper. "What did you say the name was?" Ward's voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her usual commanding tone. She knew that name. knew it in her bones, in the deepest recesses of her guilt-ridden memory. Riley Vega, ma'am, age 34, currently employed as a mechanic in Riverside, Pennsylvania, I believe. Ward didn't need to hear the rest. The location, the age, the alleged service, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, inevitable clarity. "I'll be there in 2 hours." Her voice, though low, carried the unmistakable steel that had defined her career. There was no room for discussion, no time for protocols. This was beyond the purview of any standard procedure. The drive from Washington to the small Pennsylvania town was a blur, yet agonizingly slow. Every mile marker was a tick of the clock, each passing landscape a fleeting distraction from the storm brewing within her. It gave Ward time to think, and thinking was precisely the last thing she wanted to do. Riley Vega. The name belonged to a ghost, a phantom that had haunted her waking hours and tormented her sleep for 5 agonizing years. A woman who was supposed to be dead, buried not just in the earth but in a classified file so deep, so compartmentalized, that even Ward, with her extensive clearances, needed special authorization to access it. Ghosts, she knew, had a way of coming back to haunt you, especially when you'd been the one, however inadvertently, to kill them. The irony was suffocating. She, Admiral Celeste Ward, had been the architect of the lie that had buried Riley Vega. Now, she walked through the Riverside Police Department, a bastion of local law enforcement like she owned it. Her dress blues, immaculately pressed and adorned with a constellation of ribbons and commendations, commanded instant, unquestioning respect from every uniformed officer she passed. The weight of her rank, the sheer authority she exuded, was a force unto itself. The ribbons on her chest told a story of 3 decades immersed in naval intelligence, a career spent orchestrating operations that had shaped the modern world in ways the public could never truly know. They spoke of clandestine missions, daring infiltrations, and strategic victories. But none of those countless ribbons, none of those hard-won accolades truly represented her greatest success, or, more accurately, her most devastating failure. The one that gnawed at her soul silently, persistently. Detective Julian Cross intercepted her at the front desk. He was a tired-looking man, his eyes intelligent but weary, shadowed by too many late nights and too many unsolved cases. His jaw had the kind of stubborn set that meant trouble for anyone trying to push him around. He saw the Admiral, felt the immediate shift in the room's atmosphere, and instinctively knew this was far beyond anything he'd ever handled. "Admiral Ward, I'm Detective Cross. I have to say I wasn't expecting—" His voice trailed off, a mix of awe and apprehension. Ward cut him off, her gaze piercing, unwavering. It was a stare that had intimidated seasoned foreign diplomats, made hardened terrorist leaders sweat, and brought even the most unyielding adversaries to their knees. "You're about to step into waters so deep they don't appear on any map. Where is she?" Her question was not a request, but an order, delivered with an icy calm that brooked no argument. Cross, a veteran of 2 decades in law enforcement, found himself uncharacteristically flustered, reduced to a mere pawn in a game he didn't understand. He quickly led her through a maze of sterile, cream-colored corridors, his voice a rapid-fire torrent of explanations about evidence procedures, jurisdictional boundaries, and the proper protocol for stolen valor cases. He rambled, trying to establish some semblance of order in a situation that was clearly spiraling beyond his control. Ward let him talk, her expression unreadable, while her mind raced, churning through an endless array of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. How had Riley survived? The last intelligence report from Syria had been definitive, unequivocal. All members of Unit 77, the elite, top-secret all-female SEAL team, were declared killed in action Kia. Their bodies, or what remained of them, had supposedly been recovered, identified, and buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. Ward had personally attended each funeral, a solemn, agonizing parade of grief. She had delivered the folded flags, crisp and heavy with sacrifice, to their families. She had looked into the raw, tear-filled eyes of Riley's mother, a woman broken by loss, and lied. She had lied with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent her entire career protecting national secrets, safeguarding the dark underbelly of clandestine operations. Each lie had tasted like ash in her mouth, each grieving family a testament to her calculated deception. But if Riley was alive, if she'd somehow, against all odds, escaped the unescapable, then the entire edifice of that meticulously constructed lie, that carefully buried secret, was about to come crashing down. "She's been here 3 days," Cross was saying, his voice regaining some professional composure as he recounted the basic facts of the interrogation. "Won't break, won't change her story. Claims she was part of some classified unit. Says her records were erased." "I've never seen anything like it, Admiral. Either she's the most dedicated fraud in history, or—" He paused, searching for the right words for a logical conclusion to the impossible. "Or she's telling the truth," Ward finished quietly, her voice a low, chilling whisper that held a profound weight of dawning realization. It wasn't a question, but a grim, terrible confirmation. They stopped outside Interrogation Room 3. The fluorescent lights hummed with a detached indifference, casting long, stark shadows. Through the one-way glass, Ward could see her, a small woman sitting perfectly still at a cold metal table. Riley looked older than the last time Ward had seen her, 5 years ago. Worn down, yes, perhaps by years of living a lie, by the constant vigilance of an assumed identity. But beneath the superficial changes, her posture was unmistakable. Even in civilian clothes, even after all this time, she sat with the rigid discipline of a soldier, the unwavering stillness of a SEAL. Every line of her body spoke of training, of resilience, of a deep-seated warrior spirit that no amount of forced normalcy could extinguish. Ward felt the crushing weight of 5 years crash down on her shoulders. 5 years of believing she'd sent 12 of the Navy's finest, most promising warriors to their deaths. 5 years of carrying the solitary, unbearable guilt of Operation Nightfall, the mission that was supposed to be the decisive blow, the final, surgical cut that would end the war on terror, and instead had ended in unmitigated catastrophe, a black stain on her conscience. The echoes of that failure, once a dull ache, now resonated like a thunderclap in her mind. "I need to see her alone," Ward stated, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. Cross, though intimidated, still had his protocols. "Ma'am, this is an active investigation. I can't just—" He began to protest, a flicker of his professional duty asserting itself. Ward turned to face him fully, and Cross saw something in her eyes that made him step back, involuntarily recoiling. It was a depth of resolve, a cold, hard intensity that spoke of battles fought and secrets kept, of a world far removed from the procedural rulebook he lived by. It was the look of someone who had seen the abyss and walked away, scarred but unyielding. "Detective," Ward's voice was low, laced with an authority that transcended rank, reaching directly into the core of his understanding. "What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. So high it officially doesn't exist. That woman in there isn't just a veteran or a fraud or a mechanic. She's a weapon, a living, breathing piece of military hardware that was designed to do things that would give you nightmares. Things that would make the hair on the back of your neck stand on end." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper, compelling him to listen. And if she's really who I think she is, if my worst fears are confirmed, then we don't just have a stolen valor case on our hands. We have a problem that goes way beyond that. A problem that could unravel years of covert operations, compromise countless assets, and shake the very foundations of national security. Cross swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He'd seen plenty of grim scenarios in his career, but this was different. This was beyond his comprehension, beyond the scope of his training. What kind of problem? He managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Ward's gaze intensified, a flicker of grim determination in her eyes. The kind that could start a war not with a known enemy, but with unseen forces, with buried truths, with the very fabric of the world they thought they knew. She knew with chilling certainty that the door to Interrogation Room 3 was about to open onto a past that demanded reckoning, a truth that threatened to consume them all. Admiral Celeste Ward entered the interrogation room alone, the heavy door clicking shut behind her with a definitive, chilling sound that seemed to seal them off from the rest of the world. The mundane hum of the police station, the distant murmur of voices, all faded into an eerie silence. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against the sudden quiet that now enveloped them. Riley looked up from her seat across the cold metal table, her gaze meeting the Admiral's, and for a moment, time stopped. The sterile fluorescent lights of the room blurred, the harsh outlines of the furniture softened, and the linear progression of years dissolved into a single, profound instant. Ward wasn't looking at a 34-year-old mechanic accused of fraud. She was back, jarringly, vividly, in the stark, expectant briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command. She saw with crystalline clarity the faces of 12 young women, fierce and resolute, who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in SEAL history. Their eyes, once vibrant with youthful determination and an unwavering sense of purpose, now ghosted before her mind's eye, a painful tableau of what had been lost. "Admiral Ward," Riley's voice, a raw, fragile sound, escaped her lips, cracking like a teenager's, all her carefully maintained composure crumbling in an instant. The stoic mask she had worn for years, for 5 years of a fabricated life, for 3 grueling days under relentless interrogation, shattered into 1,000 pieces. The hardened survivor, the impassive mechanic, was suddenly a vulnerable young woman grappling with an impossible reality that threatened to consume her. "But they told me you were dead. The whole unit. They said everyone was Kia." Her voice trembled, thick with disbelief and a grief that had been locked away in the darkest corners of her soul for half a decade. The words were a desperate plea for understanding, a fragile thread connecting her to a past she thought was irrevocably lost. Ward sat down slowly, deliberately, the chair scraping faintly on the tiled floor, the sound harsh in the silence. Her gaze never left Riley's face, a silent, intense study of the woman across from her. Riley looked like a civilian, yes, undeniably. Her clothes were nondescript, the generic coveralls obscuring any hint of a military physique. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, practical ponytail. She looked, in every ordinary sense, like someone who had never held a weapon, never taken a life, never navigated the brutal complexities of clandestine warfare. But Ward knew better. She knew with chilling certainty what lay beneath the mechanic's uniform, beneath the carefully constructed ordinary life, beneath the facade of forgettable anonymity. She knew the steel forged in the fires of hell, the unwavering spirit that had defied every expectation, every attempt to break it. "Show me your left shoulder blade," Ward said quietly, her voice a low command, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of urgency that transcended the usual protocols of an interrogation. It was a test, a confirmation, and an opening. Riley hesitated, her eyes darting instinctively to the one-way mirror. a silent acknowledgement of the unseen presence on the other side. Years of training, of indoctrination into the world of deep cover, screamed at her to maintain her disguise, to protect the fragile illusion she had built. She had spent 5 years hiding, years perfecting the art of blending in, of being invisible, of becoming someone utterly unremarkable. This request, so specific, so personal, threatened to tear down every barrier she had painstakingly erected around herself. The very thought sent a tremor through her. "Admiral, there are people watching." Her voice was a strained whisper, a plea, not for herself, but for the remnants of the life she was supposed to be living, for the fragile illusion she desperately clung to. "Show me." Ward's voice was firm, resolute, cutting through Riley's resistance with the sharp edge of undeniable authority. There was no room for hesitation, no time for debate. This was a moment of absolute truth, for both of them, a convergence of past and present that could not be denied. Slowly, reluctantly, as if performing a ritual of immense significance, Riley turned, her back mostly to Ward, and with a deliberate movement lifted her shirt. The fabric rode up, exposing the pale skin of her left shoulder blade. There, nestled just beneath the curve of bone, visible only if one knew precisely where to look, was a colorful butterfly tattoo. It was vibrant, almost whimsical, a splash of civilian artistry against the backdrop of her hidden life. Clearly it was a later addition, a deliberate attempt to cover something, to reclaim a piece of herself, to paint over a past too dangerous to reveal. But beneath its painted wings, a darker, more significant mark emerged, faded but unmistakable. A small black anchor, sturdy and resolute, with a trident, the iconic, unmistakable symbol of the Navy SEALs. It was a mark of belonging, of an elite brotherhood, or in this case, a hidden sisterhood. But it was the number etched beneath it that made Ward's breath catch, a sharp intake of air that resonated in the silent room, sounding impossibly loud to her own ears. 77. The number was almost imperceptible at first glance, a subtle scarification, a tattoo so finely rendered it seemed to merge with the very texture of her skin. This was the unit that officially never existed. The program that had been buried so deep within the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Pentagon, sealed behind layers of compartmentalized security, that even mentioning its designation, even hinting at its existence, was an act of treason punishable by the severest penalties, by lifetimes behind bars in black sites. It was a ghost unit, its very existence erased from all public and most classified records. And yet here it was, undeniable, inked onto the living, breathing skin of the woman before her, a testament to a truth that refused to stay buried. "Jesus Christ," Ward whispered, the words escaping her lips involuntarily, a raw expression of profound shock and undeniable, overwhelming relief. Her carefully constructed facade of control, honed over decades of high-stakes intelligence work, wavered, the years of stoicism momentarily cracking under the weight of this impossible confirmation. "You're really alive." Riley turned back around, her face streaked with tears that now flowed freely, unbidden, washing away the layers of carefully constructed indifference she had worn for so long. 5 years of suppressed trauma, of isolated grief, of living a fabricated life, of enduring the silence of a nation that had forgotten her, came flooding back with the Admiral's simple, devastating confirmation. The dam had broken. "I've been trying to tell them for 3 days," Riley said, her voice choked with emotion, a desperate, raw plea for understanding in every word. "I've been trying to tell someone for 5 years, but nobody believes me because I don't exist anymore, do I? You made sure of that." The final words were an accusation, direct and unyielding, cutting straight to the heart of Ward's guilt. The accusation hit Ward like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that momentarily stole her breath, leaving her winded and reeling. Because Riley was right. Ward had been the one to authorize the cover-up, the one who signed off on the decision that the truth about Operation Nightfall, about Unit 77, was deemed too dangerous, too destabilizing, too politically volatile to ever see the light of day. She had, in essence, erased 12 exceptional women from history, not just from the cold record books, but from the very memory of a nation they had served with unwavering dedication. She had done so to protect a secret that she genuinely believed could topple governments, destabilize fragile international alliances, and compromise an entire intelligence infrastructure, potentially costing countless more lives. She had done it for what she believed, with every fiber of her being, was the greater good, for national security, for the silent protection of the homeland. But seeing Riley, hearing the raw pain, the depths of betrayal in her voice, made the cold, clinical calculus of those greater good decisions feel sickeningly, catastrophically wrong. The cost had been immeasurable. "Riley, you have to understand." Ward's voice was strained, a desperate, almost pathetic attempt to explain the unexplainable, to justify the unjustifiable, to find some shred of absolution for the unforgivable. Understand what? Riley's voice was rising now. 5 years of suppressed rage, of solitary suffering, finally breaking free, raw and untamed, a torrent of righteous fury. It wasn't a question seeking an answer, but a primal scream of profound injustice. That you left me to die? That you told my mother I was dead while I was being tortured in a Syrian prison, enduring unspeakable horrors? That you gave me a fake identity and a fake life, forcing me to abandon everything I was, everything I believed in, and told me to forget everything I'd sacrificed for this country? Each question was a hammer blow, striking with surgical precision at the core of Ward's guilt, at every calculated decision she had made. The agony in Riley's voice was palpable, a testament to the unquantifiable, unrecoverable cost of their secrecy. Ward felt the invisible walls of the sterile room closing in, the air growing thick, suffocating her. Through the one-way glass she could clearly see Detective Cross watching intently, his silhouette sharp against the hallway light. He was probably recording every word, every damning accusation, every raw, desperate confession. This conversation, which had been meticulously planned as damage control, a quiet clean-up of a burgeoning situation that threatened to expose one of the military's darkest, most carefully guarded secrets, was spiraling violently out of control. It was no longer a tactical discussion. It was turning into something far more profound, far more personal. It was a reckoning, a long overdue accounting that was 5 years in the making, a moment of profound moral consequence. The mission was compromised, Ward said carefully, attempting to regain some semblance of control, to steer the conversation back to the cold, hard facts, to the strategic necessities that had ostensibly driven her decisions. She clung to the logic, the cold rationale that had guided her through countless difficult choices. "We had intelligence that suggested the mission was a setup," Riley interrupted, her voice gaining strength, cutting through Ward's defense like a blade, sharp and precise. "We walked into a trap because someone in your chain of command sold us out. And instead of investigating, instead of finding out who betrayed us, you decided it was easier to pretend we never existed." Her words were a brutal truth, stripped bare of all euphemism. The truth hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon, each word a bullet aimed squarely at Ward's conscience. Ward had suspected as much, of course. She had spent countless sleepless nights, haunted by the chilling thought, wondering how the enemy had known exactly when and where Unit 77 would strike, how their intelligence had been so pinpoint accurate, so devastatingly precise. The whispers of a double agent, of a deep-seated compromise within their own ranks, had always lingered at the edges of her consciousness, a persistent, chilling hum. But investigating such a betrayal would have meant admitting the unit existed, would have meant congressional hearings, a devastating media frenzy, and the catastrophic, irreversible end of programs that she genuinely believed were vital for keeping America safe in a rapidly evolving, dangerous world. It would have meant a scandal so profound it would make previous intelligence failures pale in comparison, threatening the very core of their national security apparatus. There were larger considerations, Ward said weakly, her voice thin, hollow, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The phrase, once a powerful, unimpeachable justification for unimaginable sacrifices, now sounded like a flimsy, desperate excuse, even to her own ears. Larger than the lives of 12 women who trusted you? Riley's question, quiet but devastating, tore through Ward's carefully constructed defenses, shattering them completely. It wasn't a shout, but a whisper that carried the unbearable weight of profound betrayal, of broken trust. Ward closed her eyes, the pain of that question twisting in her gut, a physical ache that brought her to the brink of tears. When she opened them, Riley was staring at her with the kind of cold, unwavering fury that Ward had seen only in the eyes of hardened enemy combatants, the look of someone who had nothing left to lose, whose world had been irrevocably shattered, and who now only sought answers and perhaps a brutal, unyielding retribution. The air in the room crackled with a silent tension. You want to know what really happened in Syria, Admiral? You want to know what your larger considerations cost? Riley's voice was low, menacing, an ice-cold threat that promised a deluge of painful truths. Ward nodded, though every instinct, every fiber of her being screamed at her to stop this conversation before it went any further, before the Pandora's box of secrets was fully, irrevocably opened. This was beyond the scope of a simple interrogation. This was about the profound moral compromises made in the name of national security, about the souls sacrificed on the altar of geopolitical strategy. Riley leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more raw menace, more chilling power than any shout. "Then buckle up," she said, her eyes fixed on Ward's, holding her captive in their intense stare, "because you're about to learn why some secrets are too dangerous to keep, and why burying the truth never, ever makes it truly disappear." Ward felt a cold chill run down her spine, a profound sense of foreboding settling deep within her bones. Riley was no longer just talking about her own pain, her own unbearable suffering. She was talking about something far bigger, something that threatened to expose a deep, festering rot at the very core of their black operations, at the heart of the intelligence community. This was no longer just about Riley Vega. This was about Unit 77. This was about the entire program and the ethical abyss it had descended into. And then Riley delivered the final devastating blow, the revelation that would unravel everything Ward had believed to be true, everything she had clung to as justification. "They told us all the same thing, Admiral," Riley said, her voice now a low, guttural growl of anguish, vibrating with unspeakable pain. "Every single one of us, that we were the only survivor, that the rest of the unit was gone, dead. We believed it. For 5 years we carried that alone, the guilt, the grief, the absolute crushing weight of thinking we were the last one left, that everyone else had perished because of some unseen failure." Ward stared at her, her mind reeling, struggling to process the enormity of Riley's words. The implications were staggering, horrifying beyond measure. Not just Riley, but all of them? Alive? living a lie, believing themselves to be the sole survivor of a massacre, each carrying the unbearable burden of singular loss. The weight of this revelation was monumental, crushing, threatening to splinter her very being. It changed everything. The cover-up wasn't just about erasing a unit from the records, it was about systematically isolating each member, condemning them to a solitary purgatory of grief and false identities, ensuring that their trauma was compounded by profound, unending loneliness. Ward's vision blurred for a moment, the sterile room spinning sickeningly around her. The calculated lie, the larger consideration, the strategic necessity she had so rigidly adhered to, had not only erased their service, but had compounded their trauma beyond imagination, ensuring they suffered in isolation, believing they had lost everything and everyone they had ever fought alongside. The cost, she realized with a sickening lurch, was far, far greater than she had ever imagined. The ghosts, it turned out, were not just haunting her. They were haunting each other, trapped in a separate, solitary hell, unknown to one another, each believing they walked through a world of shadows alone. This was a betrayal on an unimaginable scale, not just of their service, but of their very humanity. Admiral Ward ordered the room cleared with a single sharp word, "Out!" Her voice, though low, carried the undeniable authority of 3 decades spent at the highest echelons of naval intelligence. It was a command that brooked no argument, a force of will that instinctively compelled obedience. Detective Julian Cross, caught off guard by the sheer intensity of her presence, found himself stumbling backwards, already in the hallway, before his conscious mind had even registered the decision to move. He watched through the one-way glass as the Admiral strode to the door, locked it with a decisive click, and then reached into her uniform pocket. She pulled out a small, sleek device no larger than a thumb drive and activated it with a silent press. A faint, almost imperceptible hum filled the air, a silent scramble of any recording equipment in the room. Whatever was about to happen between these two women, it was going off the books. Officially, it wouldn't exist. When they were alone, truly alone for the first time in 5 years, the careful composure Riley had maintained for 3 days, through countless interrogations, through the unbearable weight of her secret, shattered like glass, the dam finally broke. Tears, hot and uncontrollable, streamed down her face, mingling with the residue of grime and exhaustion. 5 years of suppressed trauma, of solitary grief, of the crushing burden of a lie, came flooding back with a visceral force that left her gasping for breath. Her body convulsed with silent sobs, raw and guttural, the sound trapped within the walls of the small, sterile room. "They told me you were dead, Admiral," Riley choked out, her voice barely a whisper, thick with anguish and disbelief. "The whole unit. They said everyone was Kia when they pulled me out." Ward sat across from her, watching the raw, unfiltered agony that twisted Riley's features. In that moment, she saw not the broken woman before her, but the fierce, unyielding warrior who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission in SEAL history. Riley Phantom Vega had been the best of the best, a sniper who could put a bullet through a keyhole at 800 yards, even in adverse conditions. A linguist who spoke 4 complex Middle Eastern dialects fluently, seamlessly navigating cultural nuances as deftly as she navigated hostile territory, and a soldier who had never failed a mission until Operation Nightfall. "We had to let the world think that." Riley, Ward's voice was heavy, thick with the weight of 5 years of guilt, a confession as much as an explanation. "Including you. The alternative was worse than letting me believe my entire team was dead." Riley's voice cracked, rising with renewed fury, disbelief warring with profound pain. "Worse than giving me a fake identity and telling me to forget everything I'd sacrificed? Everything I fought for. Everything I was. The questions hung in the air, sharp and accusatory, each one a blade twisting in Ward's conscience. Do you have any idea what it's like to grieve for people who are actually alive? To carry that guilt every single day, every single night, believing you were the only one who made it out, that you failed them, that you were the last one left in a graveyard of heroes? The isolation, the profound loneliness of that fabricated truth had been its own form of torture. Ward pulled out a sleek, government-issued tablet, its screen dark and inert. With practiced fingers, she entered a complex series of codes, a sequence that would have triggered alarms in 3 different government agencies, instantly notifying them of an unauthorized access attempt to the highest levels of classified data. The screen flickered to life, displaying classified files that officially didn't exist, records meticulously scrubbed from every database, every public ledger. This was the true cost of her decision, laid bare. "Your team isn't dead, Riley," Ward said, her voice softer now, laced with a fragile hope she hadn't dared to articulate in years. "They're all alive." Riley stared at the screen in stunned, disbelieving silence, her tears momentarily forgotten. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of hope and terror, greedily scanned the images that materialized before her. There were photos, recent ones, digital snapshots of lives she thought had ended in the desert. There was Rodriguez, her steady, calm presence, now working as a nurse in a bustling Seattle hospital. Her face softened by civilian life, but her eyes still holding a familiar depth. There was Chun, the quiet martial arts expert, teaching self-defense classes in a sunlit studio in Denver, her movements precise even in the still image. And Williams, the irreverent jokester of the group, running a small, cozy bookstore in a charming town in Maine, surrounded by towering shelves of literature. All of them alive, all of them ghosts like her, living under assumed names, under false pretenses. "Why?" Riley whispered, the word barely audible, a fragile question born of overwhelming confusion and profound pain. "Why did you do this to us? Why make us believe we were alone?" Ward closed the tablet, the screen returning to darkness, reflecting the haunted look in her own eyes. She leaned back in her chair, the weight of the truth pressing down on her, because Operation Nightfall wasn't just a mission, Riley. It was a test, a proof of concept for a new kind of warfare. 12 women operating in deep cover, capable of infiltrating terrorist organizations in ways that male operatives never could. You weren't just SEALs, you were the future of special operations. Her voice was devoid of pride, instead tinged with a weary resignation, acknowledging the terrible price of that future. The truth, raw and brutal, spilled out in fragments, each revelation more devastating than the last, tearing apart the carefully constructed narratives Riley had clung to. Unit 77, it was revealed, had been the Pentagon's most classified program, a joint operation between naval, special warfare and the CIA, shrouded in layers of secrecy so profound that only a handful of individuals even knew it existed. The mission to Syria had been their first major deployment, a crucible designed to test their unique capabilities to infiltrate a hardened terrorist cell that was planning sophisticated, devastating attacks on American soil. The intelligence was solid, Ward continued, her voice slipping into the detached, clinical tone of a briefing officer, a coping mechanism for the horror she was recounting. "We had a source inside the organization, someone who'd been feeding us meticulously detailed information for months. The plan was simple: get in, identify the leadership, eliminate the threat, get out, clean and surgical, a textbook black op. But it was a trap," Riley said, her voice hollow, the words a bitter echo of the past, filled with the trauma of that night. "The biggest trap in the history of modern warfare. Our source wasn't just compromised. He was a double agent from the beginning. The entire terrorist cell was a front, designed specifically to lure American Special Operations Forces. They knew we were coming before we even left the base. Every single piece of intel, every map, every perceived vulnerability was a meticulously crafted lie to draw us in. Riley closed her eyes, the vivid memories of that night, the night everything went catastrophically wrong, flooding her senses. The team had inserted via submarine, swimming 2 miles to shore in the dead of night, their movements silent, precise, perfectly executed. The compound had been exactly where intelligence said it would be, nestled amidst the desolate Syrian landscape. The guards were positioned exactly as briefed, their patrols predictable, their routines seemingly exploitable. It had felt too easy, almost unnerving in its simplicity, but they had been trained to trust their intel, to follow the plan, to execute without question. The weight of that trust, now revealed as a profound betrayal, pressed down on her. "We walked right into it," Riley said, her voice tinged with self-recrimination, the raw shame of a warrior caught unawares. 12 of the Navy's best, and we walked right into it like amateurs, like lambs to the slaughter. "You walked into the most sophisticated ambush in military history," Ward corrected, her voice firm, resolute, absolving Riley of the self-blame. "The enemy had been planning it for over a year, Riley. Over a year. They studied American tactics, learned our procedures, anticipated every possible countermeasure. They knew exactly how we'd approach the target, exactly how we'd react when things went wrong, how we'd try to adapt. The ambush wasn't just well executed. It was perfect. A masterpiece of strategic deception designed to neutralize and capture, not just kill. The ambush had been a symphony of chaos and precision. The first explosion had taken out their communications, a deafening roar that instantly cut them off from extraction, severing their lifeline to the outside world. The second, larger blast had collapsed a significant portion of the building, separating the team, scattering them like dust. By the time Riley, disoriented and battered, fully realized what was happening, half her unit was already captured, rounded up in the dark, their training rendered useless by the sheer, overwhelming force and deceptive planning of the enemy. "I watched them take Rodriguez," Riley said, her voice barely audible, a raw, painful confession. "She was 20 feet away from me, and I couldn't do anything. Nothing. They had her zip-tied and hooded before I could even raise my weapon. It was so fast, so precise. The helplessness, the searing impotence of that moment had haunted her every waking hour. The enemy wanted prisoners," Ward explained, her voice hardening, outlining the chilling logic behind the ambush. "They didn't just want to eliminate you, they wanted to study you, Riley. To learn how American female operatives were trained. You represented something they'd never encountered before in such an elite capacity. Women who could fight like men, who could infiltrate their organizations where men couldn't, who could turn their own deeply ingrained cultural assumptions against them. You were a new threat, and they wanted to dissect it, to understand its very essence. Riley had been the last one captured, holding out for a grueling 6 hours in the ruins of the compound, a one-woman stand against overwhelming odds, a testament to her tenacity. She'd killed 11 enemy combatants fighting tooth and nail before they'd finally taken her down with a tranquilizer dart, a cowardly but effective measure. And even then, even after being subdued, she'd nearly escaped twice during transport, a testament to her unyielding will and resourcefulness. 4 months, Riley said, the number a heavy stone in the air, laden with untold suffering. 4 months of hell, Admiral. And you left us there. You knew where we were, you knew what was happening, and you just left us. Her voice was laced with a deep, corrosive bitterness. "We tried everything," Ward said, and for the first time her voice broke, betraying the immense emotional toll the past 5 years had taken on her. It wasn't just guilt, it was a profound, soul-deep sorrow. Every extraction plan, every diplomatic channel, every backdoor negotiation, we exhausted every option. But the enemy wasn't interested in prisoner exchanges or ransom demands. They wanted to break you. They wanted to prove that American women weren't as tough as American men, that your training was flawed, that your spirit could be crushed. They wanted to make an example, a statement. The torture, Ward explained, had been systematic, meticulously designed not just to extract information, but to utterly destroy their sense of identity, to strip away their humanity, to break their spirits. The enemy had studied psychological warfare with a chilling precision, had known exactly how to attack the minds of elite soldiers, to exploit every vulnerability. They'd used everything from the physical torment of waterboarding and electric shocks to the insidious psychological manipulation of sleep deprivation, sensory deprivation, and the constant threat of sexual assault. It was a calculated campaign of dehumanization. "They made us watch," Riley said, her voice distant, haunted, eyes unfocused, staring at horrors only she could see. Every time one of us broke, they made the others watch. They wanted us to see each other's weakness, to lose faith in our training, in our country, in ourselves. They wanted us to turn on each other, to disintegrate from within. The memory was a fresh wound, festering, infecting her very being. "But you didn't break, Riley," Ward said quietly, her voice filled with a profound, almost reverent respect. "None of you broke completely, even when they thought they had you, even when they believed they had shattered your spirits. You were planning your escape. You were fighting back in ways they couldn't comprehend." Riley's escape had been the stuff of legend within the Black Ops community, though the legend would never be told in public. She'd spent weeks patiently, meticulously loosening a piece of concrete in her cell wall, working on it for minutes at a time, often with improvised tools, whenever the guards weren't watching, whenever she had a sliver of opportunity. When the opportunity finally came, a fleeting window of distraction, she'd used the broken concrete, now a sharpened weapon, to kill 3 guards swiftly and brutally before fighting her way out of the compound, bleeding and injured but free. 47 miles, Riley said, her voice now a flat, almost robotic recitation of facts. 47 miles through hostile territory with a dislocated shoulder and internal bleeding. I walked for 3 days, hiding during daylight, following the North Star like some kind of medieval pilgrim, driven only by the raw, desperate will to survive. "You saved yourself, Riley," Ward said, her voice thick with emotion, "and in doing so, you saved the program." "What do you mean?" Riley's brow furrowed, confusion briefly eclipsing the pain. Ward activated the tablet again, displaying classified reports from the immediate aftermath of Riley's escape. "Your escape route, Riley, the one you painstakingly navigated, led our forces directly to the compound. Within 72 hours of your escape, we were able to launch a precision extraction, pulling out the rest of your team. They were alive, though barely, but more importantly, we were able to capture the entire terrorist network, including the double agent who'd set you up, who thought he was so clever. Your courage, your sheer determination to survive, turned a catastrophic defeat into a decisive victory." Riley stared at the screen, seeing photos of her teammates, battered and broken but undeniably alive, being loaded onto medical helicopters. The image was a searing counterpoint to the 5 years of solitary grief she had carried. They were alive, all of them. "They're really alive," Riley whispered, the truth slowly sinking in, a fragile, agonizing hope taking root. "All of them, physically anyway." Her voice trailed off, a new understanding dawning. "Psychologically?" Ward shrugged, a weary, almost defeated gesture. "That's why we had to erase you all. The mission was too classified to acknowledge the existence of Unit 77, the capabilities you demonstrated, the sheer strategic implications. It was deemed too sensitive for public knowledge." But the trauma you endured, the severity of your captivity, was too profound to ignore. We gave you all new identities, new lives, a chance to heal without the burden of carrying state secrets, without the constant threat of being targeted, without the relentless scrutiny of a public that wouldn't understand. But we weren't healing, Admiral, Riley said, her voice rising again, a bitter accusation. We were dying inside, believing we were alone, believing we'd failed, believing everyone we fought alongside was dead. You didn't give us a chance to heal. You condemned us to a living hell, each of us isolated in our own private torment, reliving the nightmares alone. I know, Ward said, and the immense weight of 5 years of guilt was evident in every syllable of her voice, a confession of profound regret. Her eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were now filled with a deep, aching sorrow. I made the wrong call. I thought I was protecting you, protecting the program, protecting national security. I truly believed it was the only way to minimize the fallout, to prevent a global crisis. Instead, I was just protecting my own career, my own reputation, my own flawed judgment. The admission was raw, stripped bare of all pretense. It was the hardest truth she had ever uttered. Riley studied the Admiral's face, seeing the profound toll that the cover-up had taken. Ward looked older than her years, worn down by the crushing weight of secrets and the agonizing knowledge that her decisions had destroyed the lives of 12 extraordinary women who had trusted her with everything. The lines around her eyes were deeper, her posture seemed to carry an invisible burden. "What happens now?" Riley asked, her voice quiet, uncertain, filled with a fragile hope she hadn't dared to feel in half a decade. Ward was quiet for a long moment, considering options that all seemed to lead to the same inevitable conclusion. Her mind, sharp and strategic even in this moment of raw vulnerability, was already mapping out the path forward, the complex process of undoing 5 years of deception. "Now," she said, her voice regaining a flicker of its old authority but softened by humility, "now we fix this, all of it. Now we fix this, all of it." Admiral Celeste Ward's voice, though still tinged with the immense weight of her confession, had regained a flicker of its old, decisive authority. Her eyes, still haunted by the truths Riley had laid bare, now held a renewed grim determination. The path forward, complex and fraught with peril, began to form in her mind. This was no longer about damage control, it was about restitution, about rectifying a profound, unforgivable wrong. "I'm going to reunite your team, Riley. Every single one of them. We're going to give you back your real identities, restore your service records, and make sure you get the recognition you deserve. Not just for your bravery, but for the extraordinary sacrifices you made, the silent battles you fought, and the hell you endured." Her words were a solemn promise, a vow to undo the years of calculated erasure. And the program, Unit 77, it was being reactivated. But this time, it would be different. This time, there would be proper oversight, real support systems, and genuine accountability. The Pentagon, Ward explained, had finally begun to realize that the future of special operations wasn't just about bigger guns and better technology, about brute force and technological superiority. It was about something far more profound, far more intangible. It was about soldiers who could think differently, who could see opportunities that others missed, who possessed a unique blend of combat prowess, intellectual agility, and psychological resilience. It was about warriors capable of navigating the gray areas of modern conflict, of operating where conventional forces could not. Unit 77, flawed in its inception and disastrous in its initial execution, was still fundamentally that future. Riley felt something stir within her that she hadn't experienced in 5 long, agonizing years: hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar sensation, like a tiny spark in a long darkened room, but it was real, The prospect of seeing her sisters again, of reclaiming the life and identity she thought was buried forever, filled her with a surging warmth that momentarily eclipsed the pain. "And the people responsible for the ambush?" Riley asked, her voice quiet, but with an underlying steel that promised no forgiveness, no mercy. Justice, a word that had felt hollow for so long, now had a tangible, burning urgency. Admiral Ward smiled, and it was the cold, unyielding smile of someone who had spent decades navigating the treacherous currents of the intelligence community. It was the smile of a predator, calculating and patient. "Let's just say that justice has a long memory, Riley, and an even longer reach. The individual responsible for compromising Unit 77, the double agent, was apprehended shortly after your escape. He provided invaluable intelligence, a desperate attempt to save his own skin, which led to the dismantling of the entire terrorist network. He's currently residing in a facility that doesn't exist on any map, and he won't be seeing daylight again. As for those higher up who ignored the warnings, who prioritized political expediency over the lives of their assets, their careers are already over. Their reputations in the intelligence community are in tatters. Some have already retired early under a cloud of unspoken suspicion. Others are facing internal inquiries that will ensure they never hold power again. The silence around their departures will be their eternal judgment. Within hours, all charges against Riley Vega were officially dropped. The official report, meticulously crafted by Admiral Ward's team, stated simply that the case had been dismissed due to lack of evidence and unverified claims. It was a lie, a bureaucratic fiction designed to maintain the veil of secrecy. But Detective Julian Cross knew better. He'd seen the look in Admiral Ward's eyes, had heard enough of their final hushed conversation through the muffled walls to understand that he'd stumbled into something far, far bigger than mere stolen valor. He knew he was now a keeper of secrets, a quiet observer of a world that operated beyond the reach of his badges and laws. His career, forever changed by this encounter, would now carry the invisible weight of classified knowledge. That very night, in the quiet solitude of the official records, Riley Vega officially died in a staged car accident on Route 15. The paperwork was meticulously processed, a new death certificate issued, a false history woven. The woman who walked out of that police station, guided by Ward's silent authority, had a new name, a new life, a clean slate. And finally, after years of undeserved obscurity, the implicit, undeniable recognition that she'd earned the right to call herself a SEAL. The title, the honor, was not stolen. It was hers, hard-won and deeply ingrained in her very being. But more importantly, she had something she'd lost 5 agonizing years ago in a Syrian prison. Something that transcended rank, identity, or official recognition. She had her team back. The knowledge that they were alive, that her grief had been for phantoms, was a new, raw wound, but one laced with an exhilarating, profound sense of reunion. The reunion itself would happen in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., a place cloaked in advanced security measures and known only to a select few. It was there that 12 extraordinary women, each bearing their own invisible scars from Operation Nightfall and the subsequent years of solitary torment, would see each other for the first time since the night their world had ended. They would arrive one by one, their faces etched with a mixture of apprehension and a fragile, nascent hope. The initial moments would be filled with disbelief, then a hesitant recognition, followed by a tidal wave of overwhelming emotion. They would cry. They would shed years of pent-up tears. Tears for the lost time, for the shared horror, for the sheer injustice of their prolonged isolation. They would rage, their voices echoing with the suppressed fury of betrayal, of being erased, of being forced to live a lie. They would grieve for the years they'd lost, for the families they'd been forced to distance themselves from, for the innocence that had been stolen. But crucially, overwhelmingly, they would do it together, as a unit, as sisters who'd been through hell and survived, not alone, but united in their resilience, their strength, and their shared harrowing truth. The bonds forged in the crucible of combat, tested by unimaginable betrayal and isolation, would now be reforged in the fires of reunion. And somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of the Pentagon, Admiral Celeste Ward would begin the long, arduous process of rebuilding Unit 77. This time, however, it would be different. This time, she would ensure that politics and secrecy would never again destroy the lives of the warriors who trusted her with everything. She would fight for them, advocate for them, and protect them, not just from external threats, but from the very system that had once betrayed them. The mistakes of the past would serve as a grim, ever-present reminder. The shadows of Operation Nightfall would always linger, but from those shadows, something new, something stronger would emerge. The ghosts were not just coming home, they were coming back to life, ready to reclaim their identities, their purpose, and their place in a world that had tried so desperately to forget them. Their silence would now be broken, replaced by the quiet strength of their collective experience, a force for good unlike any the world had ever seen. The legend of Unit 77, once buried, was about to be rewritten, not in official records but in the unwavering bond of its surviving members. They were ready, the world just didn't know it yet. The story of Riley Vega and the silent warriors of Unit 77 reminds us that courage isn't always celebrated openly, and some of the greatest sacrifices remain hidden from history. Their fight for recognition, their journey to heal and reunite, is a powerful testament to the unbreakable spirit of those who serve. We hope you found this deep dive into that tattoo's real both compelling and thought-provoking. At Veteran Biker, we strive to share stories that honor the sacrifices and resilience of service members, both seen and unseen. What are your thoughts on Riley's incredible journey? Share your insights and comments below. Your feedback helps us bring more compelling narratives to light. If you appreciated this story, please like this video and subscribe to the Veteran Biker channel for more content that explores the unspoken truths and enduring bonds forged in service. And be sure to check out our other videos appearing on your screen now. Thank you for watching.